Secretary Nichols, the United States has designated 15 countries as major non-NATO allies, including two in the Western Hemisphere, Argentina and Brazil. This special status elevates our closest partners and provides special benefits in security cooperation. Given the expansive security partnership between our countries, my new legislation would formally designate Colombia as a major non-NATO ally. It's also important to note that the ties between NATO and Colombia have grown over the last decade. In 2017, Colombia became the first country in Latin America to achieve the status of NATO global partner, underscoring the nation's leadership on security matters, not just in the Western Hemisphere, but globally. President Biden has said that Colombia is, quote, the keystone of U.S. policy towards Latin America. I fully agree and believe it's time we formalize Colombia's role. So, Secretary Nichols, given the United States' close bilateral and multilateral security partnership with Colombia, what's your assessment of formally designating Colombia as a major non-NATO ally?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly welcome the initiative and the framework that your bill brings to bear. And major non-NATO ally status is something that I believe sends a positive signal, given the tremendous progress in the relationship that we have with Colombia. Typically, the process for designating a country has been with the recommendation of the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense to the President. I don't want to jump over that process, but I know I can't think of any country that better fits that role.
Well, I appreciate that. I think it's long overdue, personally, and I hope that this jumpstarts a conversation within the administration to come to that conclusion. Let me ask you another question. In recent weeks, Putin, as part of a desperate effort to distract from the imminent assault of the Ukrainian people, has sought to expand support for this hemisphere's dictators. In an apparent attempt to intimidate our closest partner, Russian military advisors are accompanying Venezuelan military personnel near the Colombia border. But frankly, Russia's support for the region's dictators have already destabilized Latin America. Upwards of 6 million Venezuelans have fled their homeland as a result of Russia coaching the Maduro regime. The instrumentalization of vulnerable refugees is part of the Russian playbook to provoke crises, overwhelm governments, deepen divisions. As has been testified here to, nearly 2 million Venezuelans have sought refuge in Colombia, challenging the government's efforts to respond to long-term issues related to social and economic inequality, eternal displacement, the pandemic. When Russia's not launching out all-out attacks against countries, it's intimidating, extorting, and sowing mis- and disinformation, all of which aim to shake the foundations of democracy around the world. How should we interpret Russia's presence in the region? What are the security implications for Colombia?
Russia seeks to destabilize our region, to inject conflict and tension from other parts of the world to the Western Hemisphere. I had the opportunity to discuss these issues with our Colombian counterparts last week in a delegation led by Undersecretary for Political Affairs Nuland, and we remain vigilant about the Russian activities both along the border with Colombia, but more broadly in our region. And they also seek to prop up the tin pot dictators that they support in our hemisphere.
Well, and that to me is another reason why this deepening of relationship with Colombia is important within the hemisphere as a whole. Administrator Escobar, Colombia's long-standing challenges with social and economic inequality reached an apex last year when the combined effects of the pandemic and the tax reform proposal, which, by the way, I called ill-fated, but in large part in response to the IMF and the IMF pressures on countries like Colombia. And it's a broader question for another time, but it seems to me the IMF needs to have a smoothing period for these countries, not to walk away from their responsibilities, but if you're going to require some rather dramatic financial challenges in the midst of a pandemic, And we've seen what we've had to do as a nation to try to meet that challenge. Not every country has the wherewithal to do that. It needs to have a smoothing period. But that tax reform proposal led to mass protests, blockades, deeply concerning images of police violence. It was clear to me then and now that we have not done enough to work with our Colombian partners to facilitate the conditions for inclusive economic growth. The pandemic actually plunged 3 million Colombians into poverty. It's critically important that we engage both politically and programmatically to minimize these gaps and help level the playing field for all Colombians, including underrepresented communities such as Afro-Colombian and indigenous people. So I heard what you said that we are doing, but I want to challenge you and say, how do we best use our programming to promote and support an inclusive economic growth in Colombia? And how are we engaging on the issue of trying to foster greater engagement by the private sector as part of our solution to meet that economic need?
Thank you, Senator. There's no doubt that Colombia has made tremendous progress and has huge growth potential, right? But this growth potential needs to, we need to make sure that it is inclusive and it reaches these neglected rural areas, and more so as Colombia tries to recover from COVID-19 and tries to integrate the Venezuelan migrants. I think there's huge opportunities for the diversification of the economy. It has huge opportunities in the agricultural sector and to modernize the entrepreneurial class. But what we need to do and what we have done as USAID is make sure that that modern, robust 21st century Colombia reaches the rural areas. We did it with financial inclusion, where we helped mobilize over $1 billion through Colombian banks to SMEs and micro entrepreneurs in rural areas. And I think a lot more can be done to help these farmers link to supply chains, illicit development, and export their products abroad.
All right, thank you.